Welcome to this week's edition of Backyard Science with Miss Brown, Miss Waldron, Miss Butterfield, and myself, Miss Smoko. So, I have a question. How does energy transfer through an ecosystem? Think about that for a minute. In our other editions, we've talked about how all energy starts with the sun. Well, it's the same here. It all starts with the sun. The sun sends its rays down to the earth. The grass and trees absorb the earth through absorb the sun through photosynthesis, and they produce energy. A lot of energy. We're surrounded by plants and trees. But how does that energy get to animals? Well, that all happens through consumption and through the process of eating. So we have animals that eat the grass and eat the trees, and then those animals become food for another animal, which becomes food for another animal. There are three ways that we show this visually so that you guys can understand it. One way is a food chain, the next way is a food web, and then you have a food or an energy pyramid. I'm going to talk about a food chain and a food web. So let's look at an example of a food chain. So in my example of a food chain here, of course the sun has given the grass the energy to grow through photosynthesis. Grass is food for a grasshopper. So the grasshopper consumes the grass and gets its energy to live and survive. And then a wolf gets its energy from eating grasshoppers. This is just one series of events that occur. There are multiple food chains that play and interact together in what we call a food web. So in our example of a food web, we have the same chain of events. We have the grass here as the producer, and we have a grasshopper, and we have the wolf. But there are other interactions that are occurring here. So grass is not just a producer for a grasshopper, it also is for a crayfish and a snail. If you notice down here, we have a decomposer, we have mushrooms. Mushrooms help to decompose or get rid of any waste that's left over from any of these steps. So it helps to create lots of nutrients in the ground that plants also need in addition to the sunlight to grow and be successful. So in our food web, we have grass is food for crayfish, grasshoppers, and snails. They all eat the grass. If you look at our snail then becomes food or is eaten by crayfish, heron, and a shrew. Our grasshopper can become food for frogs, the wolf, heron, or the shrew. And the crayfish can become food for the wolf or the frog. And then if you move to the next level, you have the shrew, the heron, and the frog. Well, the shrew can become food for the fox, for the frog, or for the heron. The heron becomes food for the fox, and the frog can become food for the fox or for the heron. These are all individual interactions. They all come from one thing. They all start with your producers and decomposers at the bottom. This food web is just one food web of thousands of different types of food webs that can intertwine and interplay with each other to create our global food web. So from this example, the heron right here can not only be part of this food web, but it also can be part of a freshwater food web that occurs, and then have a whole different set of animals and plants that interact with it to create another step of the global food web. So with you understanding that food chains and food webs are just interactions of different plants and animals to transfer energy, I'm going to send you off to Miss Butterfield so that she can give you information about producers and consumers and move on from there. But I'm pretty sure with us having a weather aware day, she's going to need this umbrella. Yeah, have at it, Miss Butterfield.
Thanks, So we're going to talk about each level in that energy pyramid, food chain, and food web. Remember, at the base of everything, we have to have producers. This is the organism or organisms that take the energy from the sun, that light and heat energy, and they change that light energy in combination with water and oxygen, and they change that into a sugar, and they make their own food. So they produce their own food, which is why we call them producers. Now they're critical for every ecosystem because they're the only organism that takes light energy from the sun and changes it into a food for everything else. So the energy that starts with producers is going to travel all the way up through the energy pyramid, and it's also going to travel throughout each food chain and food web. Now, producers are, like the tree behind me, plants mainly, but we also have phytoplankton and algae. Each of these producers is the base of the ecosystem. So if you look at an energy pyramid, this bottom part, this bigger base, is where our producers are. This is where most of the biomass in an ecosystem is found. Remember, bio means life, and mass is like the amount of stuff. So biomass is the amount of living stuff that we have in that ecosystem. It has to be bigger at the bottom. So those producers make up that big base of the pyramid. If your pyramid doesn't have a big enough solid base, is your pyramid going to be sturdy? Probably not. So we need a really healthy, strong ecosystem full of producers, changing that light energy into consumable energy for our second level on the pyramid, which are primary consumers. Now, to consume means to use or to take in or to eat. So primary consumers don't make their own food. They have to eat other organisms. Primary consumers are often called herbivores. Herb means plant. Vor means eat. So herbivores eat plants. You know most of our herbivores. They're like grazing cattle, rabbits. Some birds only eat seeds. Anything that only eats plant materials, leaves, seeds, twigs, branches, those things, if they only eat plant materials, they are herbivores. I'm an herbivore, so if you're a vegan or some vegetarians, you're also an herbivore because you're only eating plant materials. Our next level up, so actually our third layer on our energy pyramid, are called our secondary consumers. Now, secondary consumers eat primary consumers, and sometimes they eat primary consumers and producers. So here we find things that eat herbivores, and we find omnivores. Things you might find on this list are owls or coyote, sometimes black bear, right? They're often herbivores, but they can eat small animals. Anything that can eat both producers and primary consumers are omnivores, which means they eat all, both plants and animals, or secondary consumers who only eat herbivores or primary consumers. Those are called carnivores. Carna means meat, and vor means to eat. So we've got our first three levels on our energy pyramid, and now I'm going to send it over to Waldron. Hey Waldron, it looks like it's going to rain. You might need this. Bye guys.
Hey, thanks Butterfield. Does look like it's going to rain today. Miss Butterfield just finished talking to you about producers, primary consumers, secondary consumers. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the next level consumers. Primary means first, secondary means second. The thing that would be the third on a level for the energy pyramid or for a food chain is going to be tertiary. TR means three. So tertiary consumers are things that eat the secondary consumers. If you want to go higher than that, you can have quaternary consumers. But one of the most important things is that whatever is at the very, very top of that energy pyramid, whatever is at the very top of that food chain is called an apex predator. Now, there are two other things that live in the energy pyramid that are really, really important. We have scavengers. Scavengers don't actually kill and eat anything, but they are going to eat the dead leftovers of anything else. So you might find a scavenger who comes to eat and pick off the bones of a leftover animal. They're not going to actually kill it, but they're going to benefit from something else having killed and eaten most of it. Those are scavengers. They're an important part of the food chain. Then we have decomposers. Decomposers are going to break down the bits of dead tissue, and they're going to put it back into the ground so that it can help to feed the producers. So decomposers like mushrooms and bacteria, they get onto that dead meat and they start to break it down. They start to break the meat down, and the meat starts to decompose and become part of its environment. So it becomes part of the soil and all the leaf litter that's around. All of that stuff decomposes, and all the nutrients and energy go back into the soil. Miss Brown, I think it's your turn.
Thanks, Waldron. Looks like we did need this after all. Hey guys, Miss Brown here. I'm going to talk to you guys today about an energy pyramid and some things that kind of go along with that. First, you need to understand what an energy pyramid is. Now, it's sort of like a food chain. When you think about food chain, the energy is flowing from one organism to the next organism to the next. And that is what an energy pyramid is showing. But it's showing a different way, and it's focusing on a few different things. So an energy pyramid looks like, guess what? A pyramid. So when we have that pyramid, okay, we have the bottom, and then we have a few sections, and then we get to the peak at the top. Okay, so we're going to talk about each of those sections. But in general, an energy pyramid is showing the flow of energy, and it's showing how much energy is being transferred in an ecosystem. So when you're looking at a pyramid, we have the base layer. That's where you're going to find the producers, the organisms that are the most plentiful and have the most amount of energy. Then we're going to go up the pyramid, and we're going to have what we call primary consumers. Primary means first, it's the first thing, and remember, to consume, or consumers means to consume, it's the first thing to eat. So we're just going to go producers to primary consumers, then secondary consumers, secondary, second thing to consume, so second thing to eat, and then we have tertiary consumers. Tertiary means third thing to eat. So we have producers at the bottom, primary consumers, secondary consumers, tertiary consumers. Now, imagine looking at a pyramid, and as you're looking at that pyramid, the base is very big, right? And then you go up the pyramid and it's getting smaller. So two things are going to be decreasing as we go up that pyramid and we're looking at these different organisms. The first thing that you can look at and think about is going to be the number of organisms. So when you walk outside and you look outside, what do you see a lot of? What do you see a lot of behind me? You see a lot of producers. So producers are the most plentiful. They're going to be at the bottom of that pyramid. Now, as you go up the pyramid, we have our primary consumers, and that pyramid is getting smaller. So the number of primary producers are going to get smaller. That could be birds, that could be little groundhogs, it could be little chipmunks, squirrels, things like that. Things that are going to eat those producers. Then you go up the pyramid again, we have our secondary consumers. That's going to get even smaller in number. And then our tertiary is going to be the smallest number of organisms that we see around. Remember, those are our third things to eat. The second thing that decreases as you go up the pyramid is the amount of energy that's being passed on. So if you can imagine at the bottom of the pyramid, remember we have those producers, they have 100% of the energy. They're taking the sunlight, that radiation from the sun, and turning it into their own energy. So they have 100%. Now, when something comes along and eats that producer, it's only going to be receiving about 10% of that energy, and that's not a lot. So those primary consumers are going to have to eat a lot of things to feel full. So the primary consumer has eaten. The secondary consumer comes along and it's only getting 10% of that energy, and then the tertiary consumer comes along eating the secondary consumer and it's getting 10% of that. So if you imagine on the bottom of the pyramid is 100% energy, 10% is being passed on, 10% of that is being passed on, so 1% to our secondary consumers, and then 10% of that is being passed on, so 0.1% is being passed on to our tertiary consumers. So as we go down that food chain or food web and we're looking at the energy pyramid and how energy is transferred in that ecosystem, energy is being, the amount of energy that's being passed is decreasing due to the organism actually using that energy in order to survive. Now, something that you also need to be thinking about, this goes back to food chains, food webs, energy pyramids as well, but what happens if there's a kink in the food chain, food web, or energy pyramid? Let's say there's a disease that comes along. Remember back to Oh Deer, when we played Oh Deer, some of our deers got the blue tongue disease. So the deer the deer population decreased. What did that happen? What happened because the deer population decreased? Well, if there's no deer, that means the producers aren't being eaten a lot, so there's a lot of resources available. So there's more producers around. That also means the things that eat the deer, so our secondary consumer, which would be a coyote or a wolf in this case, that population is going to decrease because they don't have a food source anymore. So those are some things that you need to be thinking about, is if something happens in that ecosystem where there's a disruption to the food chain, a lot of different populations can be affected, both good and bad. All right, guys, that is it for this week's edition of Backyard Science. We sure hope that you enjoyed it. We enjoy making these videos for you. Please holler out if you need anything. We are here for you guys. We love and miss you all and can't wait to see you again in the fall. Bye.